The first disclosure is really difficult, obviously. I think that part of the problem and why it's so difficult is that the person that's struggling with addiction, there's already so much isolation for them, and there's so much shame associated with that first disclosure. It takes an awful lot for them to get to the place of thinking, I'm actually going to take what's been going on, this secret life of mine, and exposing it to someone else. I think there's things that they fear is like further isolation, rejection, people casting more shame on them, and so they're already so full of all that. To think about going and sharing that with someone else, it's almost like I'm moving from, maybe there's some way I can sort of save myself if I can just read my Bible more, or if I can just do this thing more, do that more, and not let anybody know. But at some point it gets to the point where the shame is so great that disclosure is actually sort of freeing, but they don't expect it to be that way. They expect that when I share it, I'm going to be rejected immediately. But there's a part of the disclosure that's really important to the sense of like, well, I've been carrying this really huge secret weight, and now I've given it to someone else, and it's no longer me in this sort of hidden part of my life that is carrying this by myself, and someone else knows about it, and I actually told them, and they didn't get up and run like mad from me. And most people don't. Most people that are part of disclosure or hearing disclosure don't immediately get up and reject the person that's disclosing it. Now it gets a little more complicated when you're talking about like the partner in a couple relationship. That first disclosure is obviously a moment in time where the partner feels a massive amount of maybe rejection. They start to question all the things that have gone on in the relationship, like how much was really true. When we went on that vacation, were you on the web? Were you calling that person? Do you really love me? Or are you just saying you love me? So all the things that the partner has been communicating to them over the years is all of a sudden brought into question. And so that's a really scary thing to go through. You think you have this sense of trust, and chances are, though, probably the partner has already picked up some clues that something has gone wrong. And so there's already a deterioration that's happening in the relationship. So at the point of disclosure, oftentimes what I'll hear from the partner is, well, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And there's almost relief from them to know that of what it really is that is going wrong. But at the same time, there's a lot of loss that happens in that moment. It's like, wow. And I think what some of the initial reactions of a partner is, first of all, why wasn't I enough? If I was enough, they would have gone and looked at these images. And I think the initial assumption is that this is really about sex. And this is not about sex. This is more about intimacy. And it's an intimacy disorder when people get caught up in sexual addictions or any type of like sexual obsessions. And most people that get caught up in that really struggle with healthy intimacy. And the symptoms of not being healthy in a relationship, intimacy-wise, are already happening for the couple before the disclosure is even made. So here's some things to think about in disclosure. One of the things to think about in disclosure is you don't want to share the gory details of everything that's happened in the relationship, in the sexual addiction. I think too much information just echoes in the mind of the person that's hearing it. It makes things more vivid. It makes things more difficult to overcome. I think there needs to be an honest disclosure of what's happened, but without the details. I've had some situations where a partner will want the details, where were you and what did you do and all that type of stuff. And I think sometimes that's useful only if the partner can't let go of that. But I would say in a general sense, it's honest disclosure, but it's not within the details of what happened in the relationship, in those relationships. Now, there's some things that are pretty sacred, like the bedroom, and partners will ask, well, did the affair happen in our bed? Did it happen in our home? And things like that. And I think those are reasonable questions to answer. I usually try and allow the partner who's been betrayed to be able to ask questions. If the partner's been betrayed is not really sure whether that's a question that will be helpful to be answered or not, or the addict is not sure if by sharing that answer whether that will help the relationship out or not, usually what I have them do is consult with somebody else and say, if you go talk with this other person and they agree that this is something that's really good to be answered, like a therapist or something else, then we'll come back and we'll do it in the context of a third party, and we'll have that question asked, and that can be answered that way. So I think that's some things to think about. That disclosure is really scary. The expectation is that you'll be rejected, you'll be isolated more, but the reality is probably that you'll feel more free, and it's almost like it's a restart for your relationship. It's like, okay, here's everything that's going on within me that I've been kept secret, that you've had a sense about, but you didn't know the details about, and I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, I'm broken, and so here you go. And that's at the point where the partner, maybe not immediately, but at some point has to start believing in the intent or the heart of their partner, not on what they did. Because their behaviors are awful, and they've been very hurtful. But what is the intent of my partner? Here my partner is disclosing this. They're broken. they're sad. It's not a big fat excuse for what they did, but what it is you have a broken person in front of you, and it's that point that the heart can be at least softened in part to that person who is so regretful and so shameful for what they've done. In most cases, that with the addict is very shameful, very regretful, doesn't want to hurt their partner, has gotten caught up in this mess, and has gone places they never thought they would, and there's an awful lot of regret. And so this is sort of the restart for them, even though it may not be that they'll be perfect from here out. It's kind of the point in which they can begin to start having this conversation, and I would really recommend for those that can afford it. I mean, it's like this. They're going to need a lot of support early on, through a therapist if that's something that they can go out and they can get. I mean, do it on your own would be extremely difficult because there's such a mess of emotions that goes with it. A lot of sense of betrayal, and early on for the partner, a lot of anger. The one that's been betrayed, a lot of anger. The other thing I just want to mention that's really important to keep in mind: the addict's recovery started probably a year before disclosure. Anywhere between 6 months and a year. It's at the point in which they start to say to themselves, "This is not good for me. I don't want to do this," and they start making infractions. Just keep doing some of it, but they have full disclosure the whole time about what's going on. They start wanting to not do this, and so by the time they actually disclose the information, it's the first time the partner's ever heard of it. And so most of the time, partners are about a year behind the addict in recovery, and some of the expectations are that the partner will catch up with the addict in recovery, and that as the addict gets into groups and does other things, that they're starting to grow, and I mean they've disclosed and they feel free now, and at the same time the partner is deteriorating. This is the first time I heard of it. They're questioning it. They're angry. They want to fight at first to save the marriage, but then the despair comes after that, the realization, and so it's a very different pattern of recovery where you have one person who seems to be accelerating the freedom of having disclosed and the support that they get in the community through groups and other things like that, or through their therapist, while the other partner is for a while deteriorating. And I think that can be expected and is part of the painful part of the recovery process. And even for the addict who's watching their partner deteriorate, they don't know what to do because they already have an intimacy disorder. They have a difficult time even knowing how to support that person. And so they're trying to overcome that, and it's very hard for them to know, how can I be there for them when they're sort of like, their pain is a result of my actions. I'm the villain, and I'm supposed to be the source of comfort for them as well. It can be pretty complicated, but that's also to be expected, that's a process that happens. And eventually, the couple will sort of merge together in the recovery and look very similar as far as where they're at emotionally. But at first, there's a very, very big difference in how they experience recovery. I think the partner, at first, what I've seen is really patient. Obviously, they have a lot of shame, and they feel like they owe their partner a lot. What I've seen is the addict become too impatient too quickly. They want their partner to be okay, after a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or 6. And not always is that the trajectory of what happens for the partner. They need to stay in a very broken, humble position and very, very patient about the progress of their partner around being able to recover from this. I mean, this is like a major trauma in their life. I mean, this would be similar to being raped, in the essence of how deeply you feel it, how traumatically you feel it. And certainly you wouldn't ask a rape victim after 6 months to, just be okay and now engage your world in a normal way. And I don't mean for that to sound extreme, but I think it's a similar sort of emotional experience for them. Like, I've been totally and utterly abandoned by the person that I trusted to be there for me the most, and in a sexual way, which complicates it even more. So I think that the patience, the humility, and I think even for the partner, if they start noticing the addict being less humble, being less broken, being less patient, it could be signs of a relapse. The idea of moving back into sort of this sense of like, okay, I've done everything that I've needed to restore this, and you're still not getting it. You're still not warming up to me. You still don't want to hold my hand. You still don't have sex with me, or whatever else it might be. That then moves them back into that position that is really more threatening to their addiction, which is kind of like that. It's more of a sort of a moral high ground and arrogance that they probably don't intend to have, but they start to have, and then with that arrogance comes another fall. So it's important for them to stay in a really patient, humble position. A big question it seems to always be, how do I know if he's telling the truth? Right? He's been lying to me, or she's been lying to me this entire time. And how can I ever trust again? I think at first you trust with your eyes, not with your ears, and you watch what your partner's doing. You see if they're being consistent with their accountability. You see if they're attending their groups. You see if they're putting monitoring software on their computer, and you see if they're staying humble, if they're staying broken, if they're staying open to talking about it. And I think more than anything, that the partner's really making an attempt to pull in and get close to the other partner, even if the other partner's upset. There's sort of like a resilience. I'll wait long and hard for you. I know what I've done to you is hurtful, and those are signs of someone that's continuing to pursue and someone that can be trusted. I think when they move back into sort of a withdrawn position and they get back into being preoccupied with things like work and stuff like that, and it's almost like a desensitization happens about what had actually happened with the addiction. I think that's the danger zone. That's where some of the self-soothing, where they go back into kind of caring for themselves, which is part of the addiction, rather than continuing to reach out to the partner to be relationship soothed, is part of how someone will know. So I think it's more of emotional monitoring and also observing, and most addicts, I mean, part of knowing an addict or someone who is sexually addicted is that, typically they do lie, and that's how they've kept the secret for so long. And so it's really hard to trust their words at first, but given time. And that's one of the hardest things for the addict is like, man, how to gain ground if what I say doesn't matter, if what I say sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher, I might as well not even be saying it. I didn't go there, I didn't do that, and it's really more in what they can demonstrate, what they have or have not done, and in their presence. It's an emotionally vulnerable presence that allows for ongoing conversation and safety in the relationship around this issue, and gives a lot of grace to the partner who is just struggling in the recovery process.